Good afternoon, whatever time frame you are in. Today I'm going to talk about something I have observed my entire life, and I think it's important that we understand it. And perhaps if you're stuck in the middle of a identity crisis about who you are, this might help quite a bit. But today is about cowardice. Cowardice comes in so many categories of life. There's mental cowardice, there's physical cowardice, there's integrity cowardice. And when you're young, you'll feel cowardice around you, people who are being that way, maybe even feel it in yourself when you get overwhelmed. But what I've kind of come to the conclusion is, well, obviously when you get older, you can see it just like a stinky cologne, man. You can just see it. You can see a cologne. How you like that? But the most classic thing I've seen is that wherever a person's cowardice is, they typically put on a show. Maybe it's only 50% of people do this, but I haven't had any problem finding an infinite supply of these folks. But they put on a show. That is where they are the strongest. And you sort of take on responsibilities when you say you're capable of withstanding something and standing up to something, whether it be, again, something inside your mind, you're willing to stand up for your eating habits, your religious habits, or whatever, to the point where you're willing to stand up to protect something in the real world from injustice. But in my experience, in my life experience, what I have discovered is it's really strange. The bigger a guy is, and he puts on a huge show of how tough he is, and it usually just running his mouth, right? There are definitely folks that are the whole package, thank God. But there's a lot of guys that run their mouths. And they are so amazing when you just take the story of their life and the story of their capability, and you just listen to the words coming out of their mouth, which is just their visual perception of who they are. It's the persona that they've created that they are trying to believe about themselves. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with creating something you want to be, and then you become that. That's fine, as long as you become it. As long as every day you take a step in that direction, right? The musician Prince always said, I was a shy kid in my basement making music, and he goes, I just decided one day that I was going to create the opposite persona and then act out that guy. And he goes, eventually I became that guy, which is who I wanted to be in the first place. There's no problem in my mind with, ebbing towards it and understanding that you have an actual issue that you need to overcome, like he understood his issue, right? But it's the guy that bullshits 24/7 and never takes a step in that direction. Big, tough guy when he opens his fucking mouth. When it really comes down to it, nothing there. There's this joke going around these days, probably for the last 10, 15 years, where someone says, let me see your man card. I'm going to revoke your man card. I think what's the biggest danger, and the reason why I want to make this episode, because there's a lot of messed up people in the world. I don't need to make an episode about every single one of them, right? But this is a species that I've seen recently around me, where someone is, again, just a badass with his mouth. But when it really comes down to brass tacks and acknowledging the universe and, this world, and he wants to complain constantly about the world, yet when you bring him cause and effect models that says, well, okay, you want to fix this shitty world, right? Oh yeah. Well, here's one thing we got to start acknowledging. Oh, well, don't you think that's just this? Don't you think it's just that? And he pulls his fucking panties up really high over his belly button. I'll tell you, I have personally been surrounded by two types of guys who are giant fucking cowards inside, but run their fucking mouths. And I fucking hate them. I absolutely hate them. One is the guy that, you know, every time he recalls his history and what happened, he's just the most matter of fact, you know, I'll tell you to go, you know, I'll give you a chance and then I'll tell you to fuck yourself kind of guy. And every story is really super grandiose. And then when it really comes down to it, he's a pussycat. You know, every time you see him interact with someone in public, it's, oh, thank you. Not that you should be an asshole, right? I'm not saying like I'm glorifying dickheads. But when someone is doing them injustice, you know, they put on this huge show, and then eventually you find out, oh, you're actually a big fucking pussy. Your whole life, you've just been a giant pussy, and you talk shit in front of your buddies that you're big and tough, but in real life, you're nothing. So why don't you just be yourself? Because we might come to rely on you when we need some strength, and you're really just a hollow person, right? And the second species I've seen, and this is all over the Midwest, not very dense, but there's a couple guys. The guy that buys 92 guns is typically the antithesis of anybody that really knows how to use them or would use them in a I guess some post-apocalyptic situation, some Civil War situation. They're the last guy that would be able to stomach holding a gun and pointing it at another human being in a dire situation to save his own life or his loved ones or someone else's life. The guns are merely there just to make them feel kind of some artificial security. And what's really funny is when you really meet a soldier who's seen this shit, when you meet people that have lived really intense lives, either a gangbanger or a mobster, they are so humble, they are so relaxed, because they've seen it all and they've learned the bullshit arc of a lot of that machoism. You know, it was really exciting to watch someone take someone's life on a movie, but the second they do it in real life, you know, there's a couple moments I think that, you know, you can rely on if you're there to see that your baby come out of your wife, or your wife, you know, obviously is trying to see it, but as a man, I'll just stick with men. You see your kid come out of your spouse, that's a moment where God's right there and says, see what I was doing there when I made this fucking place? Isn't that cool? I mean, do you feel your responsibility? Because I'm giving it to you. I'm giving you this little eyedropper responsibility. Now, again, if you're out in the lobby being a pussy about it, then obviously you're not going to have this glorious moment. But I think the second one is when you take a life. When someone ceases to exist in this world as a human being. And again, the further away that happens, you know, if someone's about 1,000 yards out and you take their life, maybe you're not feeling it as much. But point blank, it's the opposite of having a child enter this universe. But that's when God goes, you know, I told you this wasn't supposed to happen. You don't get to take people out. I get to take people out. People who have done it in self-defense feel horrible. Even when the other person was being very clear, I'm going to kill you. And it's just between you and them. It's like, pick your life or their life, that's it. It's a heavy-duty thing, right? The reason why I give you that digression or that example is the guys that run their fucking mouths are the kind of guys that never really, well, they have definitely not experienced that kind of shit, and they don't pay attention to what they're saying and what it means. Now you might ask, well, why is this important, dude? One, I think that people who bullshit themselves are really, really unhappy about looking in the mirror, and I think that they attempt to avoid a mirror as much as possible. They may be able to create an adrenaline flow of horse shit about themselves during a conversation, but the second it's over, the crash that they have after that bullshitting is very devastating to the character. I'm hoping that someone can hear this who finds themselves either directly in the middle of those kind of examples of you're one of these kind of guys, but now you don't have to tell a soul. You never have to tell a soul that you were one of those guys. And now hearing my voice and listening to these examples, I'm hoping that you can dig yourself out of that shit and cease to become this kind of person. What's frustrating to me is, there's a lot of us trying to wake up in the universe, trying to find the folks that are manipulating the population of this planet. And it takes some balls, right? It takes some balls, it takes some intelligence, it takes a lot of dedication. You have to read things and cross-reference things, and you have to read both sides of an argument, even though you don't want the one that's kind of trying to debunk your current thinking. And you work really, really hard. I know that most of you listening are in this camp. But then you share your findings with one of your friends who's putting on that he's a big badass. And a guy turns into a big fucking pussy right away. And he starts he just writes blank checks to terrorist organizations, to military-industrial complexes, to every single entity that's involved that through other smoking guns, they're not legit. You know that they have a history of doing things like this, and you're just trying to uncover the latest, murder mystery of what they're doing. And it's tantamount to taking the situation on one level and reversing it all the way back to the beginning, just kind of undoing it, depending on the setting of how these kind of escapism things come out, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to escape the reality that something negative is happening on their watch and that they have to get off their lazy ass and do something, right? Let's talk about what fuels this disorientation between someone growing up as a child and having no need to be anything. You don't need to be macho. You don't need to be anything. You just be a nice kid, right? And then getting to this point where they start putting on this cloak of deception about who they really are. And again, they did it to themselves first. And then they shared it with the world. That's the way it always works. And they get false accolades. It's like those fucking guys that tattoo the Navy SEAL trident on their body, and then they hang out at bars and they get all these accolades for being a badass when they haven't even enlisted in the military. They're usually formidable guys, but still, they did not become a Navy SEAL. So it's a version of that. And they always have a ton of tales about how badass they are. That's the only funny thing, is that they take stories and they exaggerate the shit out of them. And then they just retell them. And the idea is that what they're saying is, I wish I was Bruce Willis at a fictional character, right? I wish I was, Mel Gibson in fucking Mad Max 1981. Like, they wish they were these, fabled fictional characters. But a coward is a cheat, right? A coward is a person who subscribes to cheating. Because you got to pay your dues to get things in life, right? If you really want to get them. And so at some point in their youth, telling a lie worked out for them. They told a little lie and someone gave them something, gave them respect. Perhaps they gave them some object in life, but probably just respect. And then that just became the little tiny kernel that rolled down the hill and turned into a massive snowball. And what's interesting about it is that people get themselves so wound up in their lies that they no longer know what the fucking truth is. Until someone like me walks up to them and says, "Oh, you think you've said you're part of our club of guys that are real. Well, we got some shit that needs to get done here. Come on, let's go." And the funny thing is right away they can tell you've been there before. That this is like the 100th rodeo you've gone to. And what's funny about it is they've never been to a rodeo, but they've run their fucking mouth to the point that they tell the fucking planet they've done 1,000 rodeos. But they're big blubbering pussies. And you can see it right away. That's what's funny. Even if they try to say, oh, yeah, sure, I'm in. You immediately know. You can just fucking smell it. Smell the perfume coming off their dress. And you realize you got liability on your hands. Now, for those that have been there, there's usually a commonality with that group. And that is that none of us really said, we're trying to get involved with this kind of stuff. If you've had to deal with some pretty tough situations, it's because you were forced into it. And then maybe you got good at it, and then you volunteered into it. You, a lot of times, will be forced into it as a kid for reasons that have nothing to do with your destiny or your life. That helps you develop skills for manning up and willing to make a sacrifice for what's right in this world. And you take that darkness from your past, someone forcing stuff on you, and you do it for your own reasons later on, right? And just an example, what I'm talking about is, you could be in a school system like when I was a kid. You're the new kid on the block constantly. All the fucking mangy douchebags come around, try to start fights with you right away. And so you got to fend all that shit off. Usually the natives that are pretty well rooted, they don't mess with you. They just want to hang out. So as a kid, you might get forced into a lot of scuffles, and that just hardens you up. It hardens your soul up. It lets you understand how to stay calm in the middle of a situation. And then later on, when you need to man up and nut up to protect your country, you've been here a couple times, right? If you go in the military, you get toys to play with that you didn't have on the playground. But in the Waking Up episode that I did in season 1, it's all about that threshold of pain in processing data. And so when we find out something devious has happened in the planet, it's not exactly the funnest thing to think about. In my experience, it's not that all the guys want to make sure the women don't have to deal with this shit. That's the truth. For you ladies that deal with it, hats off to you. It's not that you're not equally capable of doing it. We just don't want you to have to deal with it. The men are supposed to fucking build the perfect world and protect you just in case one of the apples goes bad. So don't think that we're trying to minimize your contribution. You got kids to raise if that's what you want to do and build a beautiful family. And as soon as we come home with all the nicks and scratches from being in war, we just need little kisses on those things, right? But from man to man, there's no goddamn excuse, in my opinion. I don't give a fuck if you're some little scrawny guy or you're some 6'8" blubbering idiot. I don't care. If you're alive and you're a male, you got fucking beans and franks between your legs. I don't give a shit if you identify as a fucking sofa. I don't fucking care. If you got those bits between your legs, you are expected to fucking man up and participate. I don't care if you talk like a woman. I don't care. This is our responsibility, our genetic responsibility. But what's funny for me is that we can find a fucking smoking gun in this world. And I can give it to some people I know, and they just turn into the biggest fucking cowards. They could be in the grassy knoll in 1963, the day that Kennedy's assassinated. They could be standing behind the gunman, pointing a fucking sniper rifle at JFK. They hear the pop. They see his head explode. The cloud from the fucking rifle goes up and right into their nostrils, and they could smell it. They could say, hi, well, hey, I'll see you later. That was a good shot. See you later. And then later on say, well, maybe it was just an exercise. Maybe it wasn't what I thought I saw, because they're fucking cowards. I feel like that's how a lot of this shit happens in the world, is you have fucking cowards everywhere. They see the crime. They know exactly who did it. But in order to save their own bacon in their own brain, they let evil perpetuate, right? And then one day the Nazis come for them, and there's no one left. And to add insult to injury, in my opinion, it's that these fucking cowards want to sit and go to public places and whine and bitch about how the world works, about how it's all unfair. We have to sit and listen to it. And instead of enjoying our evening and maybe watching a little bit of television and sharing what's happened in the day, we got to listen to this whiny bitch sit there and fucking complain about the world, offering no solutions to anything, or listening to their grandiose, if I was the shit that was me, I'd fucking be goddamn Rambo and Superman fucking combined. And as soon as they're out of that theater of exhibitionism, it's right back to Pussyville. Now, when the world's good, you can tell a big, tall tale, tell everyone how you caught the 400-pound salmon. You can say how you saw a UFO. You can be the great Frisbee out of the Twilight Zone episode. Tell tall tales, because it doesn't matter. Life is good. You're just entertaining. We're enjoying your imagination about how amazing you are. That's fine. But when the world needs a few souls to step up to the plate, it's no longer funny to pretend to be a soldier, to pretend to be a man, because we really need those now. And right now, what we're fighting is an information war, right? I think a stroke of the biggest stroke of genius for Alex Jones is calling his website Infowars.com, right? I don't validate. I don't know what to think of that guy anymore. Let's just put it that way. I have nothing negative to say, nothing positive to say, but he concerns me. I think that guy at least puts his money where his mouth is. If it came right down to it, Alex Jones would be at the forefront of any battlefield, and he'd go right out with the rest of the soldiers. I truly believe that. So hats off to that guy. But right now, what is going to change the world is information in our brains transferring between wires over YouTube, over wires over podcasts, through emails, through text messages, through a picture. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, apparently some people, again, they could see anything and they'll either think it's CG if they don't want to believe it, or they think it's some staged thing. And we have plenty of disinfo now that's using computerized graphics to create fake events, so it's really tough, right? Then you have the people that are sitting around waiting to be offended because they use that as a little crutch to never have to deal with fucking reality. Luckily, I don't know too many of these people. But you see them, right? Sometimes they will take their race, their bloodlines, and if they don't want to deal with the conversation, they will arbitrarily throw out bizarre self-accusations of their race. I mean, you could be talking about a bunch of white guys, and some dude will say, well, it must be my race's fault. And you're looking at them going, I wasn't even fucking talking about your race, dude. We're not even having a race conversation here. But they'll throw that out there so they can just, it's like the flamboyant male that throws themselves into a room in some really intense, outrageous way just to get a bunch of sympathy all of a sudden. It's just reprehensible behavior in a public forum, in my opinion. And what's really interesting, without getting into tremendous specifics, but there's a few of you that are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a big movement, I'm going to say in Los Angeles area, which is a big area, which is Los Angeles and all the surrounding counties, of people starting to wake up. And I can only assume this is starting to happen around the world, but people are starting to wake up to the notion that there are giant parts of history that are complete fucking lies. And I mean famous eras in history that we're raised as kids, that there are institutions that go around saying that it happened this way and there's no other way. There's laws on the books that say you can't fucking question this era of history. But I'm telling you right now, it's crumbling at an alarming rate. Those fucking lies are falling down at a huge rate. But there are people who have been rewarded for this history. They've always been able to walk in a room and use this little part of history to get a big fucking sympathy card. I want to free this. I want to free that. I want you to tell me how you like me, so I'm going to mention this how a situation that I wasn't even fucking alive for is the reason why I get sympathy from you for the rest of my fucking life. Like Native Americans walk in and go, hey, you killed all my fucking ancestors. But we don't even see that in America, and they're probably the ones that fucking deserve it, right? But when it comes to, manning up and being able to siphon, or decipher the data, to siphon through all the facts that are coming out, or I should say claimed facts, and be able to just look at it objectively, it's nearly impossible to study the fucking facts with half these assholes because they're just a bunch of fucking pussies. And it's super aggravating. You're like, aren't we adults here? Yeah. Well, then what the fuck is your problem? Well, I just don't feel comfortable with this. Oh, why? Because it shatters the mechanism by which you have fucking stolen sympathy out of societies around the fucking world? You don't have any self-fucking worth to say that I don't want to be a goddamn chump? I don't want to... if somebody said that, you got a key to the town because your grandfather lied about creating some invention and gave your whole family line a key to New York City. Now you're walking around with the key. You can get a bunch of shit for free in New York, and it's all based on a fucking lie. And your family just keeps passing this lie all the way down so you can have this privilege. At some point, I hope that somewhere out of someone's vagina is fucking hatched a person with a goddamn bit of, self-respect. It says, the buck stops here. I will no longer take a reward that's not meant for me, that's all based on a fucking lie. It's not that my family's a bunch of bad people. We're all a bunch of good people. But that one event that happened way back then doesn't have anything to do with anyone in our family line, least of all the asshole that took the reward in the first place. But then you have this other thing that happens in life, which is pussies unite. A bunch of these guys, they end up hanging out with each other after a while. A bunch of people who lie about everything that they've ever fucking done. And they all stick together, so that way they can tell the tall tale stories and pretend how badass they are with each other. This happens everywhere. It happens as a kid, happens in your below 10, your teenage years, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, and you have to make a choice what you're going to surround yourself with, because it will infect you. You will begin to sensationalize your own past. Women don't do this. This is what's so cool about chicks. They don't need to tell that story. I mean, there was never a joke when I was a kid about how a woman lied about baking a cake that's 10 stories high. But there's always the funny joke about a guy lying about how big a fish is. Because I guess the genetic trigger there is that we have to impress our female in order to get sex or something, right? In my travels, what's interesting is the people that really did do everything that they say, it's almost impossible to find out that they've done it. You could be sitting right next to a war hero that did, Hacksaw Ridge, that guy. You sit right next to the guy, and you could talk to him about life. You could talk to him for hours and hours about life, and you won't find out that he ever enlisted in the military, and you won't find out that he saved 70 guys on a ridge. Because they have integrity. But the liar can't wait to fucking tell you how amazing they are. Because what happens is that the fabric of their being is based on a bunch of lies. And if they do not say the lie, then the scaffolding that holds up their fake fucking image crumbles. And so they rushed from one conversation to another until one of these guys walks in and is tired of the bullshit. We're tired of the lies. But being the wise old souls that we are, we know we're not just going to walk up and accuse them of being a liar, because we understand we're dealing with an overgrown child. And what's funny is we also know that when you start confronting these cowards, you might get a physical reaction out of them because they realize that the jig is up. And they really don't want the jig to be up, right? So you just start triangulating their conversation. You do what we call in psychiatric care a reflection session. First thing we do is we reflect back everything that they said that they've accomplished. Starting to create kind of an image, a structure of logic. And because it's very apparent that they're lying and they're boasting, you start to talk about the missing pieces in the story. And you try to get them to explain the missing pieces. And very quickly, since they haven't really experienced any of that shit, they haven't really done any of it, they tell bad lies. You know, if it was truly a scaffolding analogy, you know, the lies tend to come in fairly fortified beams of steel. But the problem is they need more beams before the whole thing's going to stand up, and the lie comes in made of bamboo. Right? It's just flimsy. It's not well thought out. No one's ever challenged them before, which is why they continue to tell the lie. And you make them crumble right in front of your very face. There's a great example of this in the movie Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood, Morgan Freeman, and this kid. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, a young kid goes and solicits Clint Eastwood's character because Clint Eastwood's character has a past that's just real. It's all fictional, of course. But the kid says he's killed a bunch of people and that he needs to kill this guy who cut up a prostitute's face. It's a big reward out. And he said, will you help me? And he goes, okay, I'll help you out. But my buddy's got to come, which is Morgan Freeman's character. And they ride with this kid for a while. One, they find he's blind. I mean, he's not blind, but he can't see far away. He's very nearsighted. And second, the more that he talks about having killed people, it doesn't seem like what he took away from killing a person was not what you take away from killing a person. His descriptions are like comic book episodes, right? And when he finally does kill a guy, he gives the whole thing up. Because in the end, he wasn't who he had built himself up to be, right? And what's interesting in this day and age is that we don't have those scenarios. You know, we're not looking to start any physical war with anybody. We kind of, the more intellectual you become and the more informed that you become, we have a very good chance of solving all of our problems on this planet through policy changes. Now, Europe, who's let a bunch of sanctuary cities form, they're going to have physical extraction. It's going to be a big United Airlines extraction for those fuckers. But as long as America can keep these from appearing in the United States of America, we have a good chance of just talking and keeping physical confrontation from ever happening. So what's interesting about that is that we have created, because we have, at least in this country, no impending invasion happening at this moment, these cowards get to live another day as a coward. They get to enable the negative forces of the universe by writing them blank checks constantly. And again, what the most frustrating part of the whole game is that they want to show up to a rugby game and talk shit about how easy it is to play rugby. They want to stand on the sidelines. They even want to, be the ball boy or whatever the fuck it is. And they want to pretend like they're in the second string lineup of the team. But the second the coach says, okay, Mr. Tough Guy, get your fucking ass out there, grab the ball, and go up against a real rugby player. Oh, all of a sudden they've got a cramp in their leg. And all of a sudden, my mommy's calling me and I got to go. And that's the goddamn problem. Because this ain't a rugby game. This is real fucking life. This is shit that needs to change in the universe, right? And every single time a guy writes a blank check for a real situation that needs to be dealt with on a mature level, they infect their pussified friends with the same thing. Or there's even someone coming in who would be willing to fight, be willing to take this challenge on, and get the information and pass it around and investigate it. Because that guy's a coward, he convinced them. He convinces them through a single statement that it's nothing. And then the research ends. So how do you know when someone's really a coward? I mean, there are examples like the Rugby thing that would be very apparent to anyone watching, right? You'd instantaneously know. Now, of course, there is an inverse problem that I should probably just mention real quickly, which is you have the gung-ho person who is always willing to fight, who's always willing to get out there, and it's a knee-jerk reaction without any research to go off and get crazy and ruin the world in a bad way, right? They could still be good people. It's just they're very impressionable and they just don't need a lot of information. But how do you know? How do you know someone's a coward? In my opinion, there shouldn't be a man on earth that is incapable of doing research in any category of anything. And it doesn't mean that some information is going to be really, really tough to ingest, unpleasant, scarring, even. But think about it. And I'm just going to give you a very vivid example, and I'm going to give you a fictitious scenario where it was portrayed on television. There was a series called True Detective, and it had Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, right, playing two detectives. It's one season long, had its own story, and the second season had a completely different story, and I think it sucked miserably, so I didn't really watch more than a couple episodes of the second season. But the first season was about two cops that were busting a child trafficking cult in the South, kind of Louisiana Bayou type area. It's masterfully written, it's masterfully acted, and quite frankly, Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson were cousins. Honestly, they should have had Emmys for this if they didn't get them, because it was unbelievably well done. But it came down to a point where they had a videotape of some politician, I guess, having sex with a child, a girl, and I think that there was even maybe a murder involved with that. I can't remember exactly the details, but these two detectives had to watch this video, and it was so horrifying as they portrayed it in the fictional story that it destroyed both of them. Now, they kept going, but I mean, when I say destroyed, for that moment, their life was really shitty. And this kind of thing is happening every single day. We know that child pedophilia happens all around the world. We know child trafficking happens around the world, right? So who's going to stop them? A bunch of fucking cowards? Because there's two types of men in this world. There's a guy that says, not on my watch, I'm never going to do anything. If something happens on my watch, I'm just going to run away. They don't say that out loud, of course. They're a big badass at the fucking smoke lounge. They're a badass at their fucking gun range. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. Oh, if there's any risk to their own fucking life. Well, no way, man. I got so much to live for. You know how many fucking tall tales I got to tell still? And then there's those of us that simply say, look, I don't give a fuck what it takes. I'm not going to be an idiot about it. I don't want to walk right into the lion's den like a moron, but I'll burn the fucking place down. I'll spread the information, regardless if it makes me look like a weirdo or not. It doesn't matter. And again, we want to protect our ladies from this kind of information. They shouldn't have to live this kind of world. And yeah, some women will be very ditzy and weird because they don't have any clue that the world is so dark. Just consider that a bit of a blessing. In one way, you can see that as mission accomplished. Your kid's going to be immature too, because they don't know the world's crappy. If you have a boy, well, you're going to have to initiate him into the situation, depending on what's going to be likely their future. I've recorded an episode called Being a Man 3 times. And every time I listen to it, it's too disorganized, and I just thought it was shit. I don't know that I'll ever get it worked out, but I would say this is as close to that episode as it should be. We're born genetically a particular way, right? There's some shit down between our legs, and that's what determines what you are. In terms of just, your orientation and where you identify, well, there's 5 genders that I think I might, endorse. But if you're a man, hell, even if you're a lesbian and you want to come over and do this job, believe me, you're welcome. to the club. Because you could out fucking man half the fucking guys I know. We got to toughen up. This is a systemic problem. Cowardism is a systemic problem by men being raised by cowards. Sometimes the fathers are so dominant, the kids, the sons become cowarding sons because they've always been scared of dad. You know, dad's been a fucking crazy dude. And, you know, plenty of guys are, I've got some friends of mine who are raised by alcoholic fathers, and they were very abusive. And, of course, they don't want to be anything like their parents because their fathers, because that wasn't a good combination. But what's the biggest bummer? The biggest bummer is that we don't have any manuals on how to raise kids. And I'll tell you what, if raising your sons to have some fucking balls was ever taught, you'd have the military-industrial complex and a bunch of fucking bankers try to make that illegal. It is your duty as a man to protect this fucking planet. It is your duty to not be a coward as a man. Females, you know, I would hope that you would be able to take this. And you know what? The women that I know that listen to this show are anything but cowards. They are anything but women that look the other way in the face of truth. So I think we are, for us guys that watch the show, and those of us who make it, I think we're very privileged to have company of some really great women in our circle. And that's not a suck-up, man. That's the real deal. But a lot of you ladies are forced to raise sons by yourself. And so I would say, you know, what we don't do in my circle of life, we don't talk about the word cowardice. We don't. And I can tell you from being a little kid, when I've told the story in season 1, when I was a little kid, about 9 years old, my mom, just on a 100-mile trip, she told me, you know, finish what you start. And if that becomes a tough obstacle for you, then be careful what you start. So you don't have to finish something that you would rather not have started. But she said, finish what you start, because if you do that, even if it's something you didn't want to do, I mean, we're not talking about crimes or self-mutilation, you'll learn something. And she was 1,000% correct. But she told me at the age of 9. And just that tiny phrase from my mom, which the conversation may have lasted 5 to 10 minutes tops, it changed my life. It became my work ethic. You know, probably at some levels it became my sort of a compulsive disorder, you know, at some points in my life. But, you know, I've learned to obviously balance that out for at least the last 30 years of my life. But even that little bit of compulsiveness through my teenage years, it was everything. And anytime I didn't finish something, I really regretted it. You know, I've got some beautiful paintings that I've done that I still have in my house. 95% of them are done, but I've got a couple of them. I painted the front album cover to Purple Rain, and I got Prince photo real, and a lot of the environment around his motorcycle. The motorcycle's photo real, but I didn't finish all of the outer externals of the album. But the last time my paintbrush touched his eyeball to get it perfect, to put the little tiny sheen on the tip of his eyeball, I was 16 years old. And so now when I look at it, you know, trying to touch it in my 40s, it just would not be fair. That is a time capsule from 16 years old, and it's actually a time capsule of sort of perpetual regret that I didn't finish that one thing. Now, because I got him right on the bike perfectly, I feel pretty good about it, but the whole thing was a challenge to myself to see if I could do it. I'd never done anything so complex in my life. So what I learned was that I can do anything I put my mind to. But now the game is way, way beyond acrylic paint on a canvas, right? There's a video going around of a group, I think their name is like White Thunder or something like that. There's this group of folks that are all ex-military, and they're coming out and they're realizing that wars are created by bankers. And that, you know, these kids are just fodder in the cannon. that get dismembered, that have their lives destroyed by war. And just because there's a few medals that you can get for fighting for banks, it still convinces folks that it's worth it. Again, it's the dagger of goodwill. They carve a dagger out of all of your goodwill, out of your patriotism, and then they stab you with it in war. You come home with some medical condition that they're going to end up blaming on ALS. It's just all those, WMD vaccinations that they inject you with that makes you go fucking batshit crazy. Put you out there in DU deserts where you're sucking up a bunch of radioactive isotopes and you have joint pains for the rest of your life, which again, they're going to blame on something that will keep them from being legally liable for it. They're going to blame it on your genetic line, because then it was always part of your family, and it's not the military's fault that you have shitty genetics. But they don't have shitty genetics. If anything, they've got superior genetics. They just got duped. Like I said in the episode, being offended here in season 2, or I guess this might end up in season 3, these cowards also use being offended as a technique of defending their cowardice. They sit in the conversation, and someone who's lying about who they are as a person, especially to themselves and other people, it's the old metaphor of painting yourself into a corner, because eventually they're going to meet someone like me who doesn't lie about anything, and we're going to have a conversation. Because they're going to try to join the club, the man club. And all they're going to do is they're going to put on external behaviors that put them in that man category. Trying to get into the club. I mean, literally. Being a man is a club. And you know what? On the inside, it's a little rough. And we all have different duties because we have different talents, right? You might be a strategic person that figures out how to organize the forces to go do something. You might be the muscle guy. You might be the geek. Whatever. Every single role that you can play in the game of life is a valuable role. You don't have to get in some goddamn fist fight to be a man. But you gotta stand for something, right? If you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing. That's the old saying, and that's the goddamn truth. And that's why I made the morality episode. I think we'd all be very surprised at how simple it is to become an integral human being to society. It's actually very easy. There are countless books written perhaps 100 years ago about individuals that were trying to satiate their rite of passage, right? They were trying to determine, am I a man yet? And as easy as that sounds, sometimes it ain't that easy to prove it to yourself. And that's why, quote unquote, primitive cultures have these rite of passage moments, right? Stick your hand in a glove made of bullet ants, stand on a fucking totem pole for 10 days, whatever it is, go kill a lion or participate in the group task of killing a lion. Perhaps you're supposed to throw the death blow. Perhaps you're supposed to clean the animal. Whatever it is, a lot of cultures had figured out these definitive moments in time. The Jewish people have bar mitzvahs, which I think are fantastic, because it is, if you've ever seen one, they really are a powerful mental moment for the Jewish culture to tell their sons, you are now entering manhood, and you have responsibilities, and you have principles, and you have integrity that you must uphold as a Jewish person. You can get confirmed in a Catholic church and they don't say shit. Oh yeah, there's all the commandments you're not supposed to do, but shit, we've already boiled those away by the time we're 15 years old, and to hear someone mention them again, it's just like in one ear, out the other. One of the greatest things you can gain out of being raised in the Midwest is that you don't have the giant city of pop culture putting all this crap on you to distract you. When you drive between one town and another town, there's actually something called country. You're not in a town anymore. You're not in any city limits. You're in country. And so it's quiet, and it's focused, and it's zen-ish, and it's meditative to be out there. You have a lot of time to think for yourself, to yourself, and hopefully, by having elders from that area, they have seen it all. If they didn't go to war themselves personally, they've got family members who have, and they will pass down the true wisdom from those moments, the part that's bullshit and the part that's real. And, and you'll find out that becoming a man isn't, and getting rid of your cowardice, isn't necessarily a switch that you flick and all of a sudden you have some balls, and all of a sudden, you're willing to draw that line in the sand and say, this is a very fair line in the sand. This is so clear that no one should cross that line with me, with my people, with my family, with my friends. And no matter how hard it is to enforce that line, you will, to the best of your ability. Hey, we all get our asses kicked every once in a while. We do. It's probably the most valuable thing you can have happen to you is get your ass kicked, either physically or mentally. It's as long as you don't, fight it and you accept the fact you were defeated. It's an amazing experience to figure out where your mortality lies. You'll also figure out how to not get your ass kicked the second time, either by avoiding the circumstance or becoming better at fighting. I'm going to tell you right now, if you know anyone who's a coward, or if you suspect you've behaved in these manners recently, there's nothing more invigorating than flushing that from your system. There's nothing more invigorating than saying, you know what, I'm going to cease becoming a tall tale, and I'm going to become a real person with real integrity. It will make you feel proud of yourself. And it doesn't have to be fighting World War III. It could just be stop fucking lying. Have the balls to study information that you have never allowed yourself to study before. Now, back to the ladies for 1 second here. As I'm telling you this episode, as it occurs to me, I'm looking back on my timeline of growing up in the Midwest. And to you ladies out there, and I think that the ones that watch this show are exactly the kind of females that I was raised by and with. There was no, I would say, you know what? I'm going to say it this way. There was no lack of utter courage and integrity in the females that raised me. I'm going to suggest that in the females that make up my hometown, at least when I was a kid, especially my grandparents and what have you, they were more dedicated and found it more easy to be who they really were and to maintain those principles and integrity and thus totally avoid being a coward than perhaps the males were. And I would wager that if you asked most of the men in my hometown, I would say that are 70 and older, which obviously they're disappearing off the planet, that they'd probably tell you it was their spouse that helped them maintain their integrity. Because there's not, in my experience, there's not a lot of nonsensical pressure on a woman to behave in a boisterous way. Women, again, are not expected to go to the lake and pull out the biggest catfish. But the men are. So the men feel that pressure to come back to the lodge or the club or the restaurant, the bar, and tell the tall tale because that's what they're supposed to have accomplished. When they probably have more in common with someone by saying, I fucking tried, but Jesus, I caught this, I don't know, must have been a, 6 pound, I hooked this 6 pound fish and it jumped out of the water and flew, gloriously in front of me. And I was like, oh my God, it's the best catch of my life. And it got away. And everybody else in the room would say, you know what? That's happened to me a hell of a lot more than catching the fish. So I know exactly how you feel. And there's more camaraderie with that little bit of humiliation than it is to tell the tale that you caught the big fish and, oh, you already skinned it and ate it, which is why you can't show anybody if, oh, man, my camera didn't work, so I gotta, that kind of bullshit, right? The Francis Bacon, I think one doth protest too much. The more you run your mouth about all these amazing things that you've done, I'll tell you, if you meet me, I'm going to think that's exactly the opposite of what you've accomplished in your life. I've said in several episodes, rebuilding the pyramid from the bottom up, and obviously I've kind of I've also said that that is probably not a great metaphor because we don't want a capstone to the pyramid anywhere. We don't want to build pyramids in terms of how to run society. But I will say whatever physical model appeals to you in terms of envisioning the power structure in this world. There's a reason why we don't build houses out of popsicle sticks. Because they're not strong. If every guy could build their house out of either gigantic, fossilized fucking trees or big I-beams, we would. Because to us, we want to have a shelter that never falls down. A goddamn hurricane could hit the house. A tornado could hit the house. Ain't nothing gonna shake it. An earthquake could happen and the house just kind of shrugs it off. Right? That's what we would do. So why would we want to build society out of a bunch of flimsy-ass human beings? We know that the males of this world are being effeminized. They're being effeminized with estrogen mimickers, which is you eat certain foods, a lot of GMO foods, and it mimics estrogen in a man. And so it pussifies the man. It just does. And ladies, if you want to marry a man and you have a man be your husband and raise your kids strong, then you need to be against, estrogen mimickers as well. When you help the family choose what food to eat, you got to put your foot down and say, we're not eating this shit because I don't want a goddamn husband running around in my fucking dress while I'm gone. And when there's a noise in the middle of the night, I don't have to worry about who's going to kick that guy's ass. Solve the problem. And when I get pregnant, I don't want to regret carrying your fucking genes in me. But every effeminate male that comes out, they win. They being, you'll see the them episode, which has actually been watched quite a bit, but they're the ones that get to push us around, right? Who's gonna fight back when there's no more males? There's no more men. And all the men that are here, well, you split them right down the goddamn middle if you're lucky, and half of them are cowards and half of them are ready to rumble. Again, we have a very coveted moment in time right now to win every single dispute in this world and return it back to its luster of do no harm fairness with our mouths and our minds. But if we keep going decade after decade, letting cowards contribute to the blank check writing, right? Every fucking thing that happens in the world, they've got some pussified excuse why it's not the way it is, right? They sit around and tell you how we did go to the moon. When these false flags happen, man, they just get out their pen and write excuse after excuse after excuse. You could have smoking gun videos, smoking gun picture, it doesn't fucking matter. These fucking cowards get in there and they write everyone blank checks. Making the world suck just a little bit more second to second, right? I know you feel me. There's a lot of videos on YouTube about sort of the effects of cowardism, right? But they usually come at it very icy and very sharp. I'm not sure that I have personally seen something that is systemic. The Black Pigeon guy, he's amazing. He gets the closest to this sort of dialogue, but he runs really short, very powerful videos. I think his website is blackpigeonspeaks.com. I think he's worth a listen. You want to test your constitution, and you're a guy, look in the mirror, make sure you're comfortable with who you are, audit everything that you say on a daily basis, tall tales that you've told your whole life because you invented them when you were a child and you just haven't found the reason to stop telling them. We've all done this as a kid. Sometimes your memory betrays you and you'll have memories that you develop as a child. Sometimes a dream could meld with reality as a kid. Again, I've shared the one that I had as a child where I dreamed so vividly that I saw a UFO in my little town of Derby, Kansas. It's not my hometown, but it's one town I lived in for 3 years. And it was a broad daylight observation. It was like dusky, kind of early evening. And I could still see it right now. I can see it like it happened yesterday. And it was this crazy thing. And all these people in the town were looking at it from where I was, and I was on my bicycle at the time following it. But all these people were there just like it really happened. And I now have to assume that that obviously didn't occur, because that would have been in the newspapers and would be this recorded moment in history that would have put the Phoenix Lights to shame. I dreamed that, and then I told some of my friends at the time, probably not realizing that it was complete horseshit, and then I stamped it in my brain as truth. But I was wrong. I was a kid enjoying the big eyes from my friends saying, "Oh my God, you really did see that?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, totally." So you might have those kind of infantile things that happen to you. But when you're an adult and you're making new lucid records of your history, there's no excuse. No excuse at all. That's it. Hopefully you found this inspiring. Hopefully this will help you segregate those around you into a group. And for those friends of yours that are still struggling with this, it depends on what your patience pool is. I'm losing patience with all this bullshit. I don't really want to spend my time around people who basically talk in concentrated lies constantly. And a lie is just simply portraying themselves as someone that they're not. They're interested in the drama and negativity, but they're not interested in taking that ability to process negativity and put it into actually doing research and figuring out how the world works. They've got religious paradigms they crawl into. They've got, racial paradigms they crawl into to be victims, to make sure that the conversation at any point in time is halted. Right? You get a little too real with them, boy, they're going to fucking throw their bullshit out there. Let's not be those people, okay? Let's be kind and considerate. Let's not get emotional about everything that's wrong. Let's just sit down and talk about things. Let's be fair with the evidence. Could be true, could be false if we don't have proof. But try not to slam down those potential possibilities in any absolute without proof one way or the other. deepthoughtsradio.com for all the feeds. If you're coming in on video, there's audio. If you got audio, there's video. It's also on iTunes. There's a secured Facebook group. I've already had a lot of feedback from you guys on the Facebook group, and everyone's loving it. And you guys are able to post straight into the feed. There's not this little side feed off to the side where you post and no one ever hears what you say. You're right down the center. It's beautiful. I only wish they had a little icon instead of just the background. But anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.